Zo even hallo zeggen terwijl het stil is. Hoi, ik ben
Hallo.
Hallo. Hoe is het met jullie? Hi.
So we wait a few minutes, more people are coming.
Dat ik zo fanatiek bezig ben dat het is net of het alles. Het is zo spannend dat het is heel ingewikkeld om uit te komen uit zo'n kwestie. Oké, ik zie heel veel. Oh ja, we gaan naar de PowerPoint.
Ja. Even de PowerPoint aan het ophalen.
Zien jullie hem al? Kijken. Wâtte, kan je de slides zien?
Nee, ik zie alleen jouw scherm met bestanden. Dus ik zie de PowerPoint nog niet.
Nu doen. Als het goed is, moet je hem nu wel zien.
Nee, ik niet. Ik weet niet, Susana, zie jij ze?
Okay.
Ik zie nog steeds je documents op de scherm.
Nou, dan probeer ik het even opnieuw. Oeps. Opnieuw. Nou, dat lukt niet helemaal.
Nee?
Even kijken hoor. Zit even op een andere manier, moment.
Zal ik het anders proberen? Of?
Ja, hij wil niet laden op dit moment. Kijken. I think I'm getting closer to where it is.
Zie je het nu?
Ja. Ja, geweldig. What if you can put it? Yeah, we can see the slides. Thank you. Maybe you can put it on slideshow.
Wait a minute.
Dia-voorstelling.
Yes?
Nou ja, als je op dia-voorstelling klikt.
Heb ik gedaan.
En dan.
It's on dia for me now.
Okay. We can't see it. Okay,
No?
but I guess no, we can see your cursor on dia on the file itself. But if you make it a bit bigger, then it might work.
Okay.
Well, no worries. Well, let's get started. Thank you for joining, and apologies for struggling opening the PowerPoint. systems sometimes work against us. We're very happy to see so many of you on this very special big conversation on inclusion in times of COVID-19, which is a follow-up of a UNESCO online event of the 15th of October, which was also organized by the Hague University, among others, where we already noted that the inequalities in our societies have become even more pronounced and more explicit. And we would like to take the opportunity in this big conversation to delve a little bit more deeply into the subject matter. Since we're joined by colleagues from abroad, from our partner institutions, and also internally, we have quite a few international colleagues and students who've joined us. We'll be doing the session in English. My name is Eveke de Lauw, and I'll be facilitating the discussion later on. Maybe, Wâtte, if you can click on to the next slide, then I'll briefly introduce today's speakers. First of all, I'm very happy, Wâtte, that you're the presenter in a few moments, Wâtte Zijlstra. He will provide an introduction to the subject matter, commenting on some of the findings from a recent study that he conducted with another colleague on the online delivery of education and matters of inclusion that came to the fore in this study. Wâtte is the program director for the Center of Expertise, Global and Inclusive Learning at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. And he's always shown a very strong commitment and involvement in diversity and inclusive education. So I'm very happy that you're willing to introduce the findings of your study today with us, Wâtte. After Wâtte's introduction, we'll turn to our panel of experts. We particularly welcome Susana Menéndez, who's obviously very well known inside the Hague University, but also outside, as she was a long-standing member of the executive board and internationally known as a real international higher education expert, also very dedicated to diversity, inclusion, and all matters international, if I can say it like that. So it's good to welcome you back, Susana. And I'm thrilled to say that we're also joined by a new colleague or soon-to-be colleague of the Hague University, Naomi van Stapele. She's been appointed to become our professor in inclusive education at the start of the new calendar year. Currently, she still serves as a diversity and inclusion chair at the International Institute of Social Studies of Erasmus University in The Hague. So we're very excited to have both Susana and Naomi on the panel today. Wâtte, if you can go to the next slide, please. Before we do that, just a few household rules. After the panel, you'll get the opportunity to pose your questions. Throughout the presentation, we would like you to mute your microphone for obvious reasons. And we would also like to remind you not to click through the slides. You have access to the slides and we can share them with all of you after the session. But obviously, if you click through the slides, then Wâtte gets very confused. Hopefully, you're all able to see the chat. We try and be very inclusive in everything we do, but sometimes Microsoft Teams works against us. So if you have any questions for the discussion later on, then please type them in the chat. But if you, for whatever reason, can't see the chat, then you also have the possibility to raise your hand, which you see in the top bar. You see your hand. If you click on that, then I know you have a question or a comment to make. So you can either participate by posing your questions, comments through the chat, or raising your hand as well. Please allow me to call on you so you can introduce your question and comment and also indicate who it is meant for. Finally, before I pass the floor to Wâtte, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that the session is recorded and that we'll be sharing the recording on our YouTube channel of the Center of Expertise. So if for whatever reason you don't want your face to be all over this channel, then please don't turn on your camera. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor to Wâtte. Over to you.
Thank you, Eveke. Yes, and thank you everybody for participating in this big conversation. And this big conversation is about inclusive education in times of COVID-19. And in spring, I did a research among teachers of the University of Applied Science, but also among teachers in secondary schools. These were schools, UNESCO schools. And I did this research together with Rick Wolf, and he's a researcher at RISPO from the Erasmus University, and Rick is also an expert in inclusive education. And we both conducted this research. We made a questionnaire about the experiences of the teachers during the lockdown. And it started in March 13, and the period we talked about was till the end of May. So March, April, May of this year. And I will share some results with you as an introduction for the conversation later with Naomi and Susana, and also with you, because you all can ask questions. The first thing we asked the teachers, and 160 teachers did the whole questionnaire. We asked them what their experience is and was with online education. And as you can see on this slide, 32% of the teachers said they had experience with online education before the lockdown. But almost 70% of the teachers didn't have any experiences with online education. And the group of teachers who said they have experience, the 1/3, the 32%, we asked them also how many percent of the education did you provide online before the lockdown? And almost 2/3 of these teachers said only 10% or less. So basically you can say that the experience with online education is very low before the lockdown. But we started March 13, and the transition to online education was 100% immediately. And we asked them, did you learn a lot? Did you develop? And first we asked about a grade. And we asked them to grade themselves before and during the lockdown at the end of May. And before the lockdown, they graded themselves 5.1 of 10, so pretty unexperienced. But after the lockdown, they graded themselves the digital education skills with a 7.0. So most teachers, they think of themselves that they develop themselves very much. We asked the difficulties they faced during the lockdown. And the picture here you can see is a teacher of the Hague University from the Faculty of Business Management and Marketing. And the most mentioned difficulties of the teachers they mentioned was less contact with the students, less contact with colleagues, higher work pressure, the transition to online education itself, and the design and taking assessments and tests. These were the 5 most mentioned challenges. What you can see, the contact with students and colleagues are the most mentioned difficulties they face. And in other questions, we see the same patterns. Most teachers find it very difficult to create involvement and engagement with the students, although they have a lot of contact, because we ask them how many contact they have, and the contact is not less than before the lockdown. and they also have personal contact, so one-on-one. But although they have contact, they find it very difficult to really engage and to create interaction, for example, in the classroom. 36% find it very difficult to check if students understand the content of the classes. So they don't, they find it very difficult to see, to get signals about their learning process. 64% find it very difficult to create student interaction during classes. And only 23% gets enough information from students about the quality of their education. And only 21% knows which student needs more support. And that's not only support with the content of, with the education itself, but also on the well-being of the students. We also asked about the sense of belonging of the student, of the teachers themselves. And we asked 5 questions, and you see them now on the slide, about how they feel safe and secure and if they belong to the teacher team. We asked them, for example, how they work together, if they feel that they belong, if other colleagues have time for them, if they asked to reflect and to think about different approaches. And together, these 5 questions, they form a score for the sense of belonging. And with that score, we looked at other questions. And we distinguished 3 groups: students who have a low feeling of sense of belonging, teachers who have a very high feeling of a sense of belonging towards their own team, and the group in the middle. And what we find out is that teachers who feel more sense of belonging towards their teacher team tend to provide more different ways of online education to support the students. And they also tend to search more for new forms of online educations together with colleagues. And they are more satisfied about the support from their school or faculty in transferring to online education. So what you can see is that sense of belonging towards teacher teams is very, very important when you look also to inclusive education. So a few conclusions and impressions we have is that most teachers are becoming newcomers to online education. Only a third had some experience, but the experience they had, less than 10% of the education was provided online before the lockdown. And most teachers primarily focus now on the content and design and technique of the new education. And they have contact with the students, but they don't master the interaction and dynamics in the online classroom. So they're sort of rookie teachers. Also, the most experienced teachers are newcomers now in this area. And so you can, and I can understand that they focus now on more on the content and the design and the technique. But when we talk about inclusive education, this is very difficult because they don't master the techniques of interaction and dynamics they had in a normal classroom when they see the students. So based on the results, we have a few questions and thoughts, like investing in sense of belonging of teacher teams seems to stimulate teachers to be more inclusive, and more focus is needed on the meaning of inclusion in terms of student involvement, engagement, and well-being. What does that mean online instead of the normal situation before the lockdown in the classroom when we see everybody face to face? So this is what I want to ask to our experts in the panel too. First question, and maybe we can now go back to the faces and not and close the PowerPoint, Eveke.
Sorry,
Yes?
Yeah, that's fine.
I want to ask our panelists, Naomi van Stapele and Susana Menéndez. First, do you recognize these results and conclusions of the results among teachers? Can I ask you, Susana, first?
Yes, yes, of course. Thank you very much, Wâtte, for your presentation. I think that your research results of you and Rick are very interesting because they are very similar to my own experience at the moment. I still very active in education as member of the board of trustees of different institutions like MBO, HBO, and university. And I used to talk a lot in the last time with teachers, especially in the MBO and HBO sector. And a lot of your conclusions are very similar to my own experience. What had been striking for a lot of the teachers was the idea that although we talk about digital education and online learning for a long time, we are not up to the circumstances really. And suddenly, from the 13th of March, everybody went online. In fact, mostly teachers and lecturers try to convert their normal face-to-face and personal learning classes in digital classes, and that is a very difficult thing. First of all, it's also very depending in your concept of education. We used to accept the concept of herbistra in higher education in the Netherlands, in which we most talk about education in 3 different levels, not as one layer process, but a 3-layer process about qualification, which is much more about the acquisition of knowledge and skills, socialization, which is more the way we become part of existing traditions and ways of doing as being, become a part of a society. And the third one, which is also very important for inclusion and inclusive learning, is of course subjectivization, the way in which the role of education in the way of forming our personal development, engaging with society, development emancipatory ideas of transgression, resistance, critical thinking. And what we see for a very long time, that is not new, is that we have made some progress in online education about the possibility of getting some knowledge transfer, which is one of these 3 items of education, that is qualification, that is knowledge transfer, trying to get some knowledge and skills in our students. But the other 2 very relevant aspects of education, which is not also for our teachers and our teachers teams, scholar teams, are the ideas of socialization and personal development. And I think that what it is also very interesting for your research is that maybe we need to make a sort of a shift. One thing is the consequences for education of online education, and the other is the consequences of online working for workers. Because our teachers, our scholars are also workers, and the problems, that the fact that they are missing social context, they are missing moments of innovation and brainstorming, that people is missing a fluent conversation in a digital setting, that is not only a problem of education, it is a problem of all the employees. We are seeing at the moment very often in all the researches that have been made by different organizations like Oxford University, but also McKinsey and different institutions. So there are two different things. One question is what does it mean? What does for you working at home in a sort of solitude and loneliness and missing the social component of working? And the other is the fact, what does it mean, this way of working, of the quality of the educational and learning process?
Thank you very much, Susana. Interesting that you use also the three components Vista is distinguishing. Naomi, do you recognize the results, and can you also elaborate a bit on what Susana just said?
Yes, and thank you very much. It's a very welcome research. I'm saying this as one of those teachers who, after 20 years of teaching, suddenly became a rookie. I had to shift in one weekend, teaching 3 courses for the first time. So the courses I taught for the first time and online for the first time. And I can really relate to some of the findings of the research, and I would like to maybe add some points that also in relation to inclusive education, we can, if we really look at the relationship of belonging of teachers and how that then, of course, correlates with inclusivity of students and sense of belonging of students. I think what I really noticed is that especially, so one, I have to say I was overwhelmed, but also very inspired by the way many teachers had a steep learning curve. So like the first 4 weeks after this transition was amazing. Yes, many kind of went to do what they do offline, online, but then at the same time, through also institutional support in many different institutions, so I'm not talking just my own experience, but also what I've seen broader, is that there's been quite an investment in learning while doing. And I think that was really interesting, though we all lack the time to reflect. And I think that's one aspect that we may want to come back on, reflect and learn together. So actually that's what we organized over the summer, for instance. We started to rethink, so actually what have we done in the last couple of months and how can we improve even more? So at least we get the, the didactical and the pedagogical part of the online education in some form or shape that really also contributes to the learning experience and relationship. I think what I thought was really interesting, so I think innovation and the learning curve, I think that was quite impressive. So I do see that I've been, I think, also very lucky, but I've also seen it around me, a lot of ways of organizing online teaching that actually does foster collaboration and interaction, and where the learning is a relationship between students and teachers. So for instance, I started to completely design my course with the students that I was teaching, and I saw also others who did that, and we organized a support group to help each other in doing this, but we also learned from students in this regard. So I think that's that was a spontaneous sort of out of need thing that we started to organize because we had to do something. What I do also...
You change your education to get more interaction with the students?
So what we started to do is really design it together. So we designed our interactive sessions, so less screen time, more off-screen preparations, and we decided to do it more in a project-based manner, and also including, so we had a very sort of an student-led evaluation underlining the course while the course was taking place, and students taking up particular components much more than I would have done probably in other ways. And of course, making use of different types of technologies where students often were able to teach me a lot. So I think so we make much more use of what was available in the classroom interaction. But I think what I really wanted to point out is something that is my add to, and maybe that's something that your data reveals when you look at it differently. What I saw is that many teachers with a minoritized position, so teachers of color, queer teachers, teachers in precarious contracts, teachers with difficult home situations, often were also the ones who actually stepped up and took more care of organizing this interaction with the students and caring for their well-being. So I think that's something that we really need to maybe unpack a bit more.
it is interesting what you are saying, that you created your own support group. So it's bottom up, and that works best, I think, also for the teachers. But what kind of investments can be done by the faculties, by the schools, by the institutions, to make the sense of belonging of the teacher teams towards the teacher teams bigger? Because the sense of belonging of the teacher teams is an important factor for providing inclusion. Susana, can you elaborate a bit on that? What sort of investments are needed towards the teacher teams?
Well, I think that we need to make some differentiation between the different sort of people Naomi was talking about creating and development education together with their students is a very inspiring way of work. But sometimes not all these teachers of lecturers are aware of in the capability of doing so, and sometimes at the secondary school of our community colleges, the means and experiences and possibilities are not so extended to do so. If I may address especially to our community colleges, because they are an incredible network in the Netherlands with hundreds of thousands of students, and mostly of the most, you can say, socio-economic lower bound, the most affected by this pandemic. I will say that the support of the leadership and the interactive support in the teachers team must be absolute supported and enhanced, and that it is not only about technical knowledge, you know. What I realize is that from especially your vision of education, in which the social and personal development component are so important, that we need much more even research to exactly understand how to integrate this aspect in our online education. Because we are, to some extent, and I say from my former experience working with SURF, our fantastic Dutch organization of online education, and being visited, being privileged to visit the United States very often, especially for online education, and visiting the platforms for online education like edX of Coursera, what you see is that mostly they are experts, we are experts to some extent, they are experts to extensive, very interesting online education via MOOCs, via different sort of platforms. But it is mostly, at the end of the day, knowledge transfer, what I call knowledge transfer, knowledge and skills. But I think, because we don't know how much pandemics this world can still have in the years to come, we need to do some research and to develop new possibilities of adding to online education some instruments to create also levels of socialization and emotional and moral aspect that, of course, will never replace the face-to-face interaction. You know, I don't know if you have read it, but 2 months ago, Professor Joseph van Dijk, a very well-known professor in the Netherlands, professor of communication, put a very intriguing and very compelling article in the financial newspaper saying that the only beneficiaries of online education were the companies in Silicon Valley. And I completely agree with her. I mean, we don't have to be blind of the business model of online education. moment for me to keep contacted and to do so. On the other, I still really think that we need to develop methods to include emotional, personal, and socializing possibilities.
So what you basically are saying, Susana, is that the current instruments we have are mostly focused on knowledge transfer.
In a way to
Can I talk or?
Well, you know, we have. Yes, well, it is. I think Naomi already tell that from the one to a side, everything went online, and that was at the very beginning was fantastic. But we keep going, we keep the contact, we keep being open up for our students, although. The methods were different and the approach to knowledge was different. We keep going, but I think that, and we knew that. That very of the same level, of the same impact, and face-to-face education. So we have a way to go.
Thank you very much, Susana. What you're saying is also that the current techniques we have are very focused on knowledge transfer, but not on the social and emotional development of the students. Naomi, you have very much experience with the instrument, the techniques that there are. Have you already ideas how to face that, how to meet those needs, the social and emotional needs?
So yes, and I do agree also with Susana, who says, of course, you can't. So what you can do maybe at a university or University of Applied Science and a vocational training center or a community college, of course, you need different methods and different tools. I totally agree. I do think that there is a possibility, and I think in that sense, COVID, of course, poses a lot of problems and challenges, but it also poses opportunities. And I think that was also discussed in previous discussions related to today, is that I think student-led pedagogy, the sort of the idea that students lead in a process where their lived experiences, they don't only get space for it, but are also valued and also points of departure for design and how the course, how a particular course develops online and how different expertise is brought together. I think that's possible in many, also in high schools and so on. I can talk from my own experience that at some point I really have to point out, I really felt insecure. The entire month of April, I felt I was like 25 again, and I had my first internship at a high school where I was teaching, which was a VMBO for the people who work in the Netherlands. And I felt all over that again. So first, that's one of the reasons why we started this support group of teachers to deal with this insecurity, because you immediately miss this interaction, especially when you're a high energy teacher or you're a facilitator of a learning process in a, you want to read people's also body language and so on. It's very challenging. So I think what I at some point did is because some students have really good reasons why they don't want to put up their screen, right? Why they want to shut off their video. So I can't assume. I think we should, even more now than ever, do not assume any reasons why students may want to disengage or may not want to put their videos on. I think for one, I think this entire situation really places or emphasizes that we need to, the system needs to trust the teachers and the teachers need to trust their students, that there are all kinds of reasons behind why particular dynamics are at play. what I at some point did, because I really was worried that I was losing touch with particular students, is I organized individual tutorials. Now, I had a relatively large class, and this really took a toll on me, but I needed to do it also to improve my own teaching, because I was getting information through the student-led evaluations, but I still didn't understand like what's really there's some students that I was really worried about, that they were losing, that there was a kind of phasing out of the learning process. And even though we organized in a very collaborative way, so I had 62 individual tutorials in 2 weeks on top of teaching. Now, this is of course bad, but on the other hand, it really improved and turned the entire course around. So sometimes as teachers, we feel that we need to have a particular investment to have a particular face-to-face, well, live, but not live, but then face-to-face interaction, or a WhatsApp call. Mind you, half of my students were not in the Netherlands, so sometimes we also had to work with different types of technologies that were maybe favorable to them. And that really worked for me, but it brought out how important care and well-being is as part of teaching now more than ever, because this is not a normal situation. We're not just giving online education, we're giving online education in the times of a pandemic. People are worried about losing jobs, people are worried about their family, people are sick maybe at home, or so. And I think this is something that really placed a really big burden, but also an opportunity to teachers to become even more. Care has always been part of pedagogical interactions, but now even more. And this, going back to your earlier question, of course, then also raises a question like, how can the system support and facilitate and be more tailor-made and flexible to really address these types of, I would say, shocks? Like, that's really resilience talk if we're talking about pandemic, but these were shocks to the system. And actually teachers were on the forefront of, together with students, to kind of cope with it.
Can I raise a few questions that are coming in through the chat? So there's a couple of comments by Renee Veldman, who's actually sort of focusing on the positive sides to online education, that you can be more inclusive because you're reaching more groups of students who are maybe not able to travel physically to a location of education. So maybe you'd like to comment on that. And there's also a question coming in on what do we actually mean by sense of belonging? What does it entail?
So we start with the first one, the positive things of online education. Susana?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the outreach of online education can be huge. But again, and I don't want to be, I always say I don't want to be a pessimist, I'm mostly a realist. Even in that, you have different layers and different levels. Not all our students have access to good devices and to, for example, Wi-Fi at home, where we need constantly. It is a little bit what Naomi said, the fact that not everybody wants to be on screen when they are doing a class, or when they are communicating with their teachers. So, of course, it is very important, but we don't have to forget that as institutions, we need to be open up also to think which students need be providing devices, and even the possibility of open up in institutions in a way that some students come still to the building to make use of the facilities of the institution. So, of course, online is fantastic, but not everybody have the possibility. We used to think that in the Netherlands everybody have access to everything, and to some extent the pandemic has taught us that that is not the case, especially in some levels. In the big cities in the western part of the country, there are a lot of students and pupils of secondary schools who need a lot of support. But the possibilities of online education, of access to everybody, they are absolutely fantastic.
I think when we talk about inclusion, inclusion in itself is a very complex question, a complex issue. And Kathleen Ferrier, she said during the UNESCO event on October 15, that COVID-19 added a new layer of complexity to it. So I think the online education also made the problems and questions on education, on inclusion, more explicit. Do you agree with that, or Naomi?
Yes. So on one hand, many of the inequalities that are now exacerbated already existed, but we see them more. And I think what is really important, and I think that's what also Susana is alluding to, is that the school, for many, is also a place where they can be someone else than they're at home, for instance, or when they have to work because they have to provide for their families and so on. I think we do underestimate poverty in the Netherlands a lot, and especially among our students. But I would also include some teachers in that regard as well. And I think the fact that the space of the higher education institution or education institutions, I think this goes across the board, is for many a space where they can engage in something, and they can also sometimes escape certain other realities. Not necessarily escape, but maybe just contribute in a space in a different way than they can do from home. And I think now they're completely, many are cooped in, right, at home. I want to come back to something that I didn't mention when I said something about the teachers who are in precarious situation. I think what I also really appreciated what Susana said is about that online working and online teaching. Many of the teachers were online teaching and online working and homeschooling their children. I think that's also something that really has to be said in terms of how a system can support teachers. It has to be tailor-made as well, right? I mean, I think there are certain situations that are more difficult for certain teachers than other teachers, for instance. I think to go back to the question of positive, I think there's a lot of potential in online education, but I think what we now see is that the inequalities that are exposed are also more difficult to address through online interactions. And therefore, I think we need to, and I really want to reiterate what Susana was saying, that we need to have different types of tools, but also connect different types of interventions and activities. For instance, community colleges with higher education colleges, because these transitions might now fall in danger for many to lose out in these kind of transition moments. Sorry, Susana, I see you want to come in.
You want to react on that, or is it just that you agree with Naomi?
No, I completely agree. I'm very preoccupied about the isolation of the different silos of this moment, you know, in the same that that it seems very difficult sometimes to keep up our fantastic international relations, and sometimes it's easier because you don't need to take the plane, and it's much more sustainable. To some extent, you see that as I said, Amsterdam, the ROC van Amsterdam Flevoland, and I see how they are really struggling with all these issues, and sometimes the help and the possibility of collaborate is nearby. It could be the Amstel sciences of something like that, you know, working together, learning from each other. This is a very important thing, and I completely agree with the observations of Naomi.
You talk about working together. That's also related to the other question of about sense of belonging. So, because Eveke, the question was, what is sense of belonging exactly?
Well, it's a question that relates to Biesta. Bista, sorry. covering sense of belonging. And the question is, do we know already what sense of belonging entails? Do we mean the same thing when we talk about sense of belonging?
When you talk about sense of belonging, Naomi, what do you mean by sense of belonging?
Well, I really love this question because it's really important to unpack, because sometimes institutions might celebrate or kind of communicate the need for sense of belonging, and actually what they need is identification with the higher education institution, and that's not the same. And often I think what I would not now say there's one blanket or one overarching definition, but there is, I think there are components that are now definitely more important than ever. They've been always important, but I mean, as COVID has exacerbated everything also this time. And I think one of the main components that come out also of student, because we do several student voice projects where student voice what gets lost online, for instance. So one of the student projects that I'm currently doing is what is lost, who and what is lost in online education in this transition. And one of the things that they say is connection. And I think that's there. So to just unpack it and break it down and also see how students themselves, for instance, would define sense of belonging. One, always ask them first, and I also asked, for instance, fellow teachers, and then you can have a much more contextual notion of sense of belonging that works in that regard. So sense in the broader, of course, speaks to feeling recognized, the fact that you're allowed to be there, right? That you don't feel out of place, but also that your different types of experiences, aspirations, will be the departure on which you can now build learning experiences together with others. I mean, this is how, of course, that's a very vague notion. So if you want to really operationalize it, I would always suggest let's work on it together. So, and now I think what came out of this research that we've been doing over the past 6 months with students, and these are students from different countries, mostly international students studying in the Netherlands, is connection and care. That's the two things that came out. So they felt lack of care from the institution side, from the teacher side, because it was all focusing on the technical aspect of online education, especially in the beginning. So this is now shifting. We see now that people become more familiar with online education and also are able now to implement it in a much more collaborative and flexible and tailor-made way. And then connection in the sense of we do not feel, because if you're cooked, especially when you're international students, but also students in any setting, if you're constantly in in one room, for instance, or how do you connect to the teacher in a social way? So I think more chatting, just really free chatting, like how was your weekend, how was your mother, because you mentioned last week that your mother was, like these kind of things. That's what they kind of point out. Teachers who do that, or peers who do that with each other, then that kind of online connection is being fostered. So
maybe we can talk about 3 C's.
May I make a small comment? Biesta never talk about sense of belonging. In case of there is some confusion about that.
Yes.
So yeah, okay, only that.
Yeah, sense of belonging was what I mentioned in the research I did with Rick Wolf, and that's not related to Biesta. But sense of belonging, Naomi, what you mean by this is it's about 3 C's. I think what I hear: care, connection, and collaboration.
And I have to, this is what the students and the teachers that are part of this this research that we're doing on online education, the 3 C's that they brought out. But yes, I would that's a fair working definition, but it's never complete. That's a.
I'll conclude this conversation with a question of Rash Rawal. That's he's in the board of the Hague University of Applied Science. A member of the board, and he was also in the participating our event on October 15th, and he said because of COVID-19 we have to think differently about the meaning of inclusion. About the relationship between the teacher and the student, that the relationship is changing. Maybe also it's more vulnerable because we see in each other's home situations. But also we are now in a situation that we more than ever have to learn from each other. So there is a hierarchy between teachers and students, but he said, but we need more now. We need more equality in this relationship. So what he says, we have to rethink inclusion. Can you both elaborate on that? How do you agree with that? And how do we rethink inclusion because of COVID? Naomi.
Sorry, I wanted to give Susana the.
Oh.
I think so. Inclusion should always be rethought. That's the first, and now more than ever. And I do think, I mean, there has been a very long debate in education about inclusivity and how to abrogate particular power dynamics between teacher. And this goes back to Farah, so I won't go into that much. But then there's a very interesting tendencies, very neoliberal tendencies to at the same time organize education in a different way. And I think rethinking inclusion now means more than ever, and that's why I think the 1C collaborative might speak to this, to see how you can, learning is a relationship. Teachers and students learn at the same time from each other. And I think if you make it much more intentionally part of the design and the evaluation, design, implementation and evaluation of teaching, I think it becomes more exciting, it becomes more innovative, it becomes more tailor-made and inclusive, because it will address all these different lived experiences and aspirations and talents and that are together. And this, of course, will also mean that has to sort of ripple out to the other domains of a higher education institution. For instance, in bureaucracy, I tried to do participatory evaluation, but then my board of examiners was not really keen on that. So, I mean, this is something where these type of, if we really want to rethink inclusivity or inclusive education, it will have implications for the entire, because we all, in essence, we're all facilitate a learning process. And inclusivity is a process. It's not something that you can have or not have, right? It's a process. So it's inclusion as a word. If that vulnerable, and now I go back to being a rookie teacher, I think also what teams need, what I really valued from the team that I worked in, everyone, like also people, professors, for instance, who might be in the university system or more hierarchical. Everyone was like, I find I'm insecure. I don't know what the students think of me. I can't read them. I've missed this interaction. Let's talk about this. How can we do this? And then we also started to talk with our students about this, and they had the same. And that was another connection. And I think that's where potential is for this inclusivity as a process to be intentionally part of the learning process. Thank you.
Thank you. And Susana, how do you think COVID-19 impacts the way we think about inclusion?
Well, just like Naomi, I think that you always must keep thinking and evolving the concepts, because they are completely changing every time, depending on the context and the circumstances, of course. So I think that is something you always have to do. On the other side, the basic of the concept of inclusion and the facts of inclusion, what's happening at the moment in society with inclusivity, I don't think really that things are changing a lot. What I mean is that what I see is exacerbating of the inequality and the differences. To some extent, there is a deepen of the inequalities in society by which inclusion has been a very difficult thing for a couple of things. And if that is what Russ was referring to, I think we need to rethink that and to see in which way we can create new means of open up and be much more equal and inclusive society and educational institution, and also our learning process to make it more inclusive. So I see some limitations to this idea of rethinking, you know. When Naomi was talking, I have some images of one of the first contact I have, a very young lady that was a long time ago with pedagogy and education, and that was through Paulo Freire and his pedagogy of the oppressed. And it was exactly this point of view of including in your education, in your curriculum, in your learning process, also the experience of the oppressed, the experience of those who have not the power to be part of the main discourse in society. And to some extent is that also inclusion and being inclusive with others. So I think that there are different levels. There are the levels of accessibility, there are the levels of inclusive in your curriculum, in your narrative, because we don't use the narrative of the oppressed in our education mostly. I think the Institute of Social Studies is a different thing, because I have also the honor to be a lecturer there in the 90s. And the experience of the students is very central, but in the rest of the education in our institution, that is not the case. And I think that also will be a very empowered idea of including, be inclusive also with the experiences of our pupils and students. And that maybe this fact that we are online in the house of everybody and welcoming everybody at home, that we can be open up also this experience in our educational programs, and not also in methodology, not also in accessibility, but also in the richness of the pedagogical and didactical process.
The interesting thing, this is my concluding comment, Eveke. But the interesting thing now in this time is that I think there is already a lot about inclusion, and there are many practices, but also many theories and knowledge about it. But the beauty of COVID-19, and the beauty, but it's also it's awful that we are in a pandemic. But the beauty is that more people now are experiencing that inclusion is important, and more people now are talking about it and want to know more about inclusion. And I think that's the positive thing of today. Eveke?
Yeah, and maybe on that note, indeed, we need to wrap up. Many colleagues are leaving as there's another online event, but indeed, I think we're only getting started up on the conversation, really, and there's many different angles we can pursue in different big conversations. We covered a lot of ground, from the concept of inclusion to talking about the different changing roles of students and teachers in this pandemic in relation to inclusivity, but also a little bit about the redesign of education in general. So I think we have a lot of food for thought. In the chat, many people are also suggesting reading tips with another, so it's been a very fruitful discussion, and I would like to extend a very big thank you to Susana, to Naomi, and to Wâtte for leading us in this very inspiring discussion. Many thanks, and we hope that many of you will join us again for another big conversation in December. For now,
thank you very much for the opportunity.
You're very welcome.
Bye-bye.
The next big conversations on the 10th of December, in which we'll have a look at the role of critical thinking. Take care, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Ik verstond het niet altijd.
Susana had erg slechte verbinding, dus zij viel steeds weg.
Ja, oké, dus het lag niet alleen aan mij.
Nee.
Nou, dan was het soms lastig om erop in te spelen.
Ja, precies. Oké. Goed. Nou, het was een mooi gesprek. Dus heel veel gecoverd, denk ik. Heel leuk. Ik denk dat we even moeten nadenken of we in het voorjaar weer eens een vervolg aan deze thema's willen geven.
Ja. Dus, en ook leuk om Naomi te zien, hè?
Ja, wat een fijne spreker is. Heel inspirerend. Dus dat kan niet wachten tot ze bij ons begint. Om weer mooie dingen op te zetten. Fantastisch. Oké, Wâtte. Ik heb een andere bespreking gelijk. Hartelijk dank. En tot snel weer.
Hoi.